paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers!
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Nick Bryant podcast. Today, I'm interviewing Douglas Valentine. He is an award-winning author of 9 books. His research materials have been archived at the National Security Archive, Texas Tech's University Vietnam Center, and John Jay College. Doug, how you doing today?
Well, you know, Nick, I'm getting older.
Well, as a rock poet once said, rust never sleeps.
I'm still trying to get a little bit done, but my writing days are basically over. And I wish they weren't, because I really enjoyed doing the things I did and learning what I learned.
Well, you've written some amazing books, and let's start with the Phoenix Program, America's Use of Terror in Vietnam. That was where I was first introduced to your writing, is that book.
Yeah, that was the book that basically changed my life and launched my career in terms of investigating the CIA. I had written a book before about my father's experiences in World War II, a book called The Hotel Toploba, which came out in 1984. And I, at the time, I hadn't looked past that book, and I didn't know what I was going to write about next. And Phoenix sort of fell in my lap, and took me a couple of years to write it. And a man who just recently passed away at the end of last year, John Prados, was given the manuscript to read by William Morrow, a big publisher in New York. And Prados told the editor there, Adrian Zackheim, that it was the missing piece in Vietnam War history, the Phoenix Program. And it really did fill in what the CIA was doing in Vietnam. At that particular time, 1989, there were a lot of books being written about the Vietnam War. I mean, it was the big thing, and it was soon replaced by the war on drugs. But, you know, there were a lot of books being written about Vietnam, and Phoenix Program was the first one to focus almost exclusively on the CIA and how it was organized and how it operated in Vietnam. And it was all made possible because early in my research, I asked William Colby, who at one time had been director of Central Intelligence, if he would help me. And I sent him a copy of this Phoenix Program book, and he agreed. And he had me down to Washington, D.C. First time I met him was at his law office on K Street or M Street. It was one of those places where the lobbyists all gather, and he liked my presentation, and he started introducing me to the senior level CIA officers, not just who were involved in the Phoenix Program, but who were involved in every facet that Phoenix coordinated. The Phoenix Program was a bureaucratic creation that coordinated all the existing CIA programs in South Vietnam at the time. And it aimed them all, whether they were covert action, whether they were foreign intelligence, whatever, along with military, police, State Department, everything across the board, and focused them all these various programs on eliminating the leadership of the Viet Cong insurgency, what they were calling the Viet Cong infrastructure at the time, from the top to the bottom. And that became the centerpiece of pacification and Richard Nixon's war in South Vietnam, starting in 1969, was the whole idea that you could not defeat the South Vietnamese militarily. The only way to defeat them was to eliminate their leadership, their management structure from the top down to the very bottom. And of course, one CIA officer who you'll know, who I interviewed about it, Lou Conine, told me it was the greatest blackmail scheme ever invented. And everybody just started blackmailing everybody in South Vietnam. Either you do what I want, whether it's give me a construction contract or you marry my daughter, or, I mean, whatever you can imagine, or I'll put your name on the Phoenix hit list. And so like Whitney Webb's new book, Government by Blackmail. Well, that started in South Vietnam with the Phoenix program. Either you do what we want, or you end up on the hit list. And I mean, it's evolved in the 50 some odd years since then. It's become much more sophisticated, but the same very basic idea is at the root of the United States government right now, and the programs and the operations it's waging against the American people.
So political blackmail, I think, arrived earlier than Phoenix, but I'm sure that the CIA got great experience from Phoenix. Phoenix is euphemistically called a pacification program, but really what it was a genocidal program. Could you talk to us about the genocidal side of the Phoenix program?
Sure. Every program has a stated and an unstated purpose, okay? And the stated purpose was to go after, with what one of the creators called a rifle shot approach towards the management leadership of the Viet Cong insurgency. In reality, the pacification aspect was to terrorize everybody in South Vietnam into ratting out who these people were. I mean, you couldn't just wave a magic wand and find out who these people were. The only way you could actually identify who these people were and where they were going to be at a particular time and place was through informants. And so the whole idea was to terrorize the entire South Vietnamese people, every one of them, 100%, through the same kind of operations that were waged in My Lai. And My Lai was a Phoenix program operation. And I've recently become friends with Seymour Hersh, and we talk about it all the time. I mean, this is how you terrorized people into revealing the names of the leaders of the Viet Cong and structure. You would go into a village and wipe everybody out until you found somebody who would tell you what you wanted to know.
And for my listeners that aren't familiar with the My Lai massacre, it was orchestrated by Lieutenant James Calley, and it killed everyone in a village, every village dweller in My Lai. And
Yeah,
there were ultimately thousands of Vietnamese that were murdered by the Phoenix program that weren't Viet Cong. Could you talk to us about that?
The official estimate is 25,000 people killed. The South Vietnamese had records that 40,000 people were killed. But it's just like the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, where we have just recently learned in the last week that 4.5 million people died, and inadvertently. Well, that's the same thing with Phoenix. They didn't count as part of the Phoenix tally all those people who were killed, the 500 people that were killed at My Lai. They were just collateral damage. They did not make it into the records. But when you start adding up everybody that Phoenix killed in the pursuit of this elusive an illusory goal of eliminating the management structure that it was probably, close to 1 million people.
The Phoenix program really enabled psychopaths to hone their skills. And a number of people that were involved in the Phoenix program, a number of the soldiers that were involved in the Phoenix program came back and they became actual serial killers. They got to enjoy killing, and they didn't stop when they came back from Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of any individual cases of that happening. I mean, my experience is that people are psychopaths, so they're not. I don't know that going to Vietnam turned somebody into a psychopath. That might have given them the opportunity to tap into who they really were all along, or something.
Tap into their inner psychopath.
A lot of guys came home from Vietnam, just regular GIs, who had been so traumatized by the experience that they couldn't shake it off. At the time I was doing the Phoenix program research, which is from 1984 until 1989, there was a phenomenon in the United States at that time called bunker vets. Guys who came back from Vietnam, like Rambo. Rambo becomes like the archetypal Hollywood version of these guys who could not adjust to civilian life, because in wars prior to the Vietnam War, the wars that the United States had been fighting had been pretty much main force military battles, where American soldiers faced off against German soldiers or against Japanese soldiers. And the murdering of civilians was pretty much left up to the Air Force to drop bombs on cities and stuff like that. And it wasn't actually the purpose of the program. The purpose of the program in South Vietnam was not only to engage the North Vietnamese army and the Revolutionary Army, but also guerrilla forces, the VC guerrillas. And these were the people who were farmers by day and guerrillas at night. And so the whole mechanism from determining who your real enemy was vanished. And pretty soon, the average GI, some kid who got drafted or some jerk who joined volunteered for the Marines, found themselves in this quagmire of having to decide, and you see it in Vietnam movies, who was the enemy and who wasn't, because all these people were dressed in black pajamas, and it could have been grandma, and it could have been a little 10-year-old kid that was delivering a message, and you didn't know. So eventually, due to the stress of the situation, they just started killing everybody, like Colonel Kurtz says in the movie Apocalypse Now, quoting the previous Kurtz from the Conrad book, kill all the beasts. And that became the ethic for fighting the Vietnam War. It became the justification for soldiers massacring villages like in My Lai. And when the guys came home, and I encountered this hundreds of times, they were traumatized from having killed innocent civilians. And now they're back in a civilian civic society. And they looked around them and they thought, I could be killing these people. I mean, my mother says, we haven't got anything for dinner tonight. And this is a guy who's been living on K rations for 6 months. And he gets enraged at his mother for saying, and they were triggered by this trauma, and the smallest little things were setting them off into violent rages. So the bunker vet emerged. Sylvester Stallone, the guy who goes off and lives in the woods. And there were a bunch of them. And I met lots of guys who were veterans, so traumatized by the war that they were going through this. That's the personal level that this thing unfolds at.